Okay, so we are reading Agora, the left hand of God. We are on chapter 10, Girnar, page number 297 of the book and 151 of the PDF.
Girnar. Human beings are nothing but sheep. I used to be in the flock of sheep, but I ran away. So it's no surprise that everyone else, all the so called normal people, thinks I'm insane or at least abnormal. And I think the same about them. Only one of us can be right.
So everyone thinks everyone else is abnormal.
Girnar. I've always believed that when you do a thing, you should forget everything else and do that one thing with heart and soul. When I was interested in mundane pursuits, I was a perfect materialist. You would never in your life have imagined that I could be interested in spiritual subjects. And when I was doing sadhana, I forgot everything else and I did it. For example, for 10 months in Girnar, I lived in an arka, Calotropis gigantea tree in an old cemetery, eating only ark leaves, doing a ritual to please Anjane. Ark leaves cause violent purging and vomiting. Do you know how hot Ark is? Ark means sun, and after 2 or 3 days of eating those leaves, my mouth and tongue had swollen to twice their normal size. But that didn't stop me. I continued with the ritual. Agoris always overdo a thing.
So basically, what he's attempting to say is that when you pursue something, pursue it with your heart and soul. No half measures.
To become an Agori, you must first renounce the world completely, and that is not easy, mind you. Becoming a sadhu in the real way is no joke. But before you can become a sadhu, you must do rituals for yourself, just as if you had died. You have died to the world. Then you offer your body, your senses, and your mind into the fire. Only then are you eligible to put on the ochre robes of renunciation which a sadhu wears.
So what he's talking about here is total detachment. We are the most attached to our own physical body. So if you can detach from your physical body, then you can detach from everything else.
After that, your teacher will initiate you into the sadhu's mantra, Om Namo Narayanaye. Whenever you see any creature, even the smallest ant, you must remember that Vishnu in the form of Narayan lives in that creature and you must mentally bow to him. And when you sit for meditation, you must forget the world around you and remember only your deity.
So
When I would,
again over here, what is happening is that you need to start observing consciousness in everything around you.
when I was a naked sadhu or naga, sometimes my ego would be hurt. I had been a wrestler, so I was very heavy, and people would say, why isn't this fellow working somewhere instead of begging? Or they would say, he looks like this, or his cock is like this, but I couldn't say anything. I could only repeat to myself, Narayan. It hurt, but it worked. I learned to endure all the taunts. The main reason for becoming a Naga is to remove once and for all every thought for the body. When you are naked, you can't hide anything, and before long, you don't bother to try. However, most people harbor some shameful thoughts within and would not dare to disrobe before anyone else. Why else would sadhus wear ochre robes? Once, one of my children, who had done a lot of sadhana during his life, was sitting with me, and suddenly I took off my clothes and told him, you do the same thing. We must sit naked. He didn't say a word, but took off all his clothes. It was a good test, and he passed it with flying colors. Of course, he still found it a little awkward mentally, but that is to be expected in the beginning.
So when you are going into these sadhanas, If your guru tells you jump out of the window, means you jump out of the window. So over here, his guru told him, remove your clothes, means you have to remove your clothes. There's no argument and there's no discussion.
I used to play around like that a lot. Sometimes I would wear a lungi, a sarong like garment, to go out for a drive with one of my friends. When I got fed up with the lungi, I would shout at my friend, I can't take this restriction any longer. And I would rip it from my body and drive naked. The fellow would try to pacify me. What are you doing? Think of your prestige. I'd tell him, what prestige? What does an Agori have? Any prestige? Eventually, he would calm me down and I'd put it on again. I am not as wild now as I was then, but I still hate to wear clothes. And don't forget, if Nagas are shameless, Nagis, their female counterparts, are equally shameless or even more so. They love to play about together. Nagas and Nagis know a few mantras and can achieve some minor siddhis. And as you know, when everyone, where, whenever anyone becomes powerful, there is always a tendency to let the power go to the head. Then they go around trying to show off. Suppose a group of Nagas and Nagis are sitting in the smashan. One Naga may become intoxicated with his power and elongate his penis. A Naga can elongate his penis 15 feet or more. It is simple siddhi. One Naga I knew, Mangal Giriji, in fact, used to coil his penis up like a cobra and after sucking up water through it and filling his bladder would spray out the water like a fountain for the amusement of the children who would follow him around. Anyway, one Naga would look at a female Nagi and would elongate his penis, and then he would say, ah, look at this. Can you do anything like this? Is not mine a fine siddhi? And she would sneer at him and say, wow, wow, why should you crow over such a minor achievement? Bring that thing over here. And the moment the head of the penis would touch her vaginal lips, he would get a shock, like an electric shock, but far more intense, like 1,000 scorpions stinging him all at once. And you know how sensitive the tip of the penis is. So he would learn his lesson well and proper. When they talk about being naked or digambar, sky-clad, which is one of the epithets of Dattatreya, the first Aghori, they are not talking about external clothes. They are talking about the three sheaths, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, which cover the Atma. These are the clothes which have to be removed. And once they are gone, it doesn't matter what you wear on the external body. You wear whatever is appropriate. Once you get used to being naked in this way, you are not affected by anything.
So what is he saying? Get rid of all your vasanas. Okay. So once the vasanas are removed, then there is no hindrance left after that.
I used to wear one article of apparel, my jata, matted locks. I know a method to make hair grow 10 times faster than normal, and my jata used to reach down to my ankles. A sadhu's jata is his most precious possession. Why? Each hair is an antenna, an area to accumulate knowledge from everywhere. No true sadhu ever cuts his jata. He breaks it off or it breaks by itself. Then he takes it to the Ganges and offers it to Ma because the Ganges always remains in the jata of Lord Shiva. That is why he is called Durjati, because his jata is so formidable.
So this is a fact that most sadhus, they keep long hair because the hair can act like an antenna.
But I did not come to this stage immediately. For the first 6 months I was in Girnar, I cried every night. I was asking myself, what am I doing here? Why am I not enjoying my life back in Bombay? But I was very stubborn. I wouldn't go back because I knew what people would say. This has always been my principle. If you want to do a thing, do it right, do it thoroughly, or don't do it at all. After that first 6 months, though I forgot all about my old life and started to enjoy my new life, I developed a routine. Every morning at 3 a.m., I would take a bath in one of the small lakes in the Girnar Hills. Then I would coat my body with ash from my dhuni and sit for my rituals. I made friends with all the animals there. Some people think that in the forest you are completely alone, but there is always someone watching you. The forest belongs to the animals after all, and they are very anxious to know who has come to disturb them. One night, after I began staying at my old Shiva temple, I saw a pair of eyes staring at me from beyond the fire. They didn't come any closer that night and soon disappeared. In the next few nights, they came closer and closer, and pretty soon a lion appeared, and eventually he came all the way to sit beside me. We became great friends. You know, Girnar is the last place in the world where Asian lions live. We became such good friends that when I had to leave Girnar, he followed me 5 miles, and I had the greatest difficulty in driving him away. I called him Raja, king, and I called my female monkey Rani, queen. She was completely devoted to me. Once she saved my life. I had a terrific fever, I was delirious, I couldn't do anything. Rani came near me to see what was wrong. She started to talk to me in her own way, but I was so delirious I couldn't understand and brushed her away. She persisted, and in my semi conscious condition, I threatened her with a firebrand, which I would have never done normally. She backed off and then ran into the jungle. Later, when I was sleeping, she came with some leaves that she had chewed into a paste. She put the paste into my mouth, and as a reflex action, I swallowed. Then I woke up because those were the most bitter leaves I had ever tasted. I spit most of the mass out, but I had swallowed some, enough to break the fever. That demonstrated to me that animals know these things.
So many times animals actually know the plants, which plant to eat to heal something. They actually have a keen sense about it.
Later, when I was sleeping, she came with. Sorry. When it was time for me to leave Girnar, I told her gently, Rani, I am going away and I am not coming back. When she understood that I meant it, she immediately leapt into a well and drowned herself. Even my mother wouldn't have done that.
So again, a connect can really form. And we discussed this previously that if a married couple is there, the spouse, if one partner passes on, the other one also, if there is tremendous love between them, the other one also cannot survive.
My animals have always loved me. The little Pekingese dog I have now will eat or drink, will not eat or drink when I am out of town. She must be force fed. I think my animals are better than humans. Remember, human love today is nothing but lust resulting from Rinanubandhan. Human beings will always fail you, but animals have a selfless love. They don't have any sense of I am doing this or that. They only do what their nature tells them to do. When they want to eat, they eat. When they want to sleep, they sleep. And when they want to love you, they will do it wholeheartedly. There are three important ways in which animals differ from humans. First, they can't know their parents. In the mating season, a male catches a hold of any available female, even if she is his mother, sister, or daughter. Second, animals can do jump. My little doggy does wonderful jump, but since they have no hands, they cannot perform rituals. Third, since an animal does not know its parents and it can't do Pitri Tarpan to placate its ancestors, so there is no progression in that respect. Humans pay attention to kinship and can perform ritual worship and Pitri Tarpan. Any human who does not do these things is no better than an animal. Worse, in fact, because it is a waste of a precious human rebirth, which is fantastically difficult to obtain. You don't know. And today, no one bothers, which makes most humans animals. So, by living with animals, I've learned how to handle humans. I have never feared the animals in the jungles. Animals can understand everything you think telepathically. If they sense fear, then they think you are going to attack them. And since attack is the best form of defense, they will attack you first. But if you show them that you want to be friendly, it's very easy to make them love you. If you are brave enough, animals will never harm you unless you deliberately provoke them.
So there is a concept of animal communicators. Okay, so they actually can communicate with animals. And if you really see, animals can understand very well, they understand what is happening. I used to have a thing which was used to happen with me whenever I used to go for energy field work in anyone's house. Whatever dog there was in that house, the dog always used to come and sit in my feet because the dogs understand that whatever this guy is doing is going to be beneficial for my environment. So they used to come and they used to like the energy so much that they come and sit with you. Okay. Now, having said that, the energy which is good for us, basically the dogs, cows, goats, these things, these animals, they revel in energy which is good for us when I'm talking from the environmental perspective. Ants, bees, cats, they do not, they revel in energy which is not good for human beings or not congenial to human beings. Okay, so it's good to sleep where a dog sleeps but not good to sleep where a cat sleeps.
I have a question, Nikita, here.
Yeah.
What happens if, you see a lot of cats around your house? A lot of people in Calcutta have this issue कि बहुत cats होते हैं. तो उसका
Mhm.
मतलब ये है कि that's not that energy there has to be,
It
it's not
could be a
really the
possibility.
Okay.
I'll share one example with you.
Mhm.
I had gone to a friend's house,
Yeah.
and there was this cat who used to come in regularly and sometimes come into the house also.
Mm-hmm.
And then we rectified the field of the house, and I tied something on
Mm-hmm.
the door through which the cat used to normally enter.
Okay.
And once we did that, after that, that cat was not seen.
Uh,
So at times, if you have too many, and see, this is also the reason why cats were associated with witches.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, this was one of the reasons.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Niket, another thing, but you keep seeing them walking on the walls.
Yeah,
What
this
is the?
is all right. If they are there, they will come and go, na. But if they
Okay,
are coming too much, then you need to be aware that okay, something may be off in your house.
okay, yeah.
कहीं ना कहीं तो जाएगा ही, अगर है तो जाएगा ही कहीं ना कहीं. उसका तो उपाय नहीं है.
In fact, sometimes even if you provoke them, they will not harm you. Once in Girnar, I was being troubled by a bee flying near me and buzzing in my ear. 2 or 3 times I tried to brush it away, but it came back each time. Finally, I told it, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to have to kill you. No response. I lifted my hand to smack it as I sat on a nearby stone. Down came my hand onto the empty stone. The bee had to move to one side. Each time I tried to hit it, the bee would move to one side. It didn't fly away, it didn't try to sting me. Eventually, I remembered Guru Dattatreya and his 24 gurus, and it began to dawn on me that this might not be an ordinary insect. I decided to inspect it a little more closely, and when I did, I saw it rubbing its 2 front feet together. Suddenly, I thought, or the thought was introduced into my mind, I don't know which. You have to wash your own hands off karma in the same way. Was that bee not a guru to me? I learned quite a bit from that little bee. Once, some years later, I had an argument with a lady on the subject of her insensitivity to pain and suffering in animals. About half an hour later, she went to take a bath, and a cockroach began to trouble her. It ran up her leg to a certain secret place, causing her to throw the soap up into the air. Then it ran onto her leg again. She picked up her slipper to strike it and ended in striking several sharp blows to her foot, arm, and leg as the cockroach evaded her. Every so often it would drop off and run to one side and cock its antennae and stare up at her, and then the fun would start all over again. No, I've always gotten along well with animals. I kept a cockroach as a pet once. I called him Ramji and kept him in a matchbox. Unfortunately, he was accidentally sprayed one day and passed away. In my own home, I used to have a small menagerie, which included at various times a chimpanzee and an orangutan. I even had a crocodile there for a while. His name was Gopal Das. I had to send him away to the Bombay Zoo after he chewed off the cook's leg. It was the cook's fault. He was trying to cause some trouble for me. I think Gopal Das must have sensed it. Anyway, it was too dangerous to keep him at home. I used to visit him often at the zoo. I'd walk over to the crocodile pen and call out Gopal Das, and he would amble over to me and open his big mouth wide, and I'd put some food into it. For the longest time, whenever I had a good day at the races and was flush with money, I used to go down to Crawford Market in South Bombay and purchase all the doves, pigeons, and other fowl meant for the pot and release them. Just let them fly away so they could enjoy their freedom. I had enjoyed that kind of freedom as a sadhu, and I knew what it was like to be caged up. After a while, I realized I might be interfering too much in karma, and I quit. But I will never forget those years in the jungle when I had only animals for friends, and I will always love them more than I love humans. I have become very wary of humans. When you do something nice for a spirit or animal, they will never forget it. They will love you forever afterwards. But do one good thing for a human being, and all you will get is a request for something more to be done. There is no end to human greed. That is why I always like to have animals near me. There are always new things to learn from them. Have you noticed what happens when you spell the word God backwards? You get dog. I would love to become just like a dog because of all the creatures, dogs are the most loving and the most devoted. Is there any animal more faithful than man's best friend? And a dog's love is pure and unselfish. Even if you don't feed him, still he will greet you with love. A cat would never do that. And a dog has only one master, it will never obey any other. This is the way in which you should worship God. Select one form of God to worship and then worship only that form. No matter what happens, what difficulties you may get into, be tenacious. Never lose faith. If you behave just as if you were God's dog, then you are sure to achieve. Some time back, I read in the papers about a dog whose master left him at an airport in Russia 7 years before. Every day, the dog meets every plane that lands, waiting for his master to come back and retrieve him. He is fed by the workers at the airport but refuses to go home with any of them. If you can develop that sort of devotion for God, then you will not have to wait long before He comes to you. If you crave to see Him, He has to come. Where will He go? He is not a heartless brute like the owner of that Russian dog. But you must have that perfect, selfless devotion if you want to drag God to you. That is why I always keep a dog around me so that some of the dog's personality will rub off on me. I am devoted to my doggy Lizu, my Pekingese. I would give up everyone else in the world but her, just like Yudhishthir, who refused to go to heaven unless his dog was allowed to accompany him.
So you can worship the Lord in any form. You can worship as a child, as a friend, as a uncle, as a father, as a lover, as a uh, mother. So whatever form you take, you start worshiping the Lord in that particular form. And then generally you need to stick to it. You can't keep changing relationships.
Now I have never worried about animals when I was in the jungle. The forests are full of other dangers, though. It is great to be a sadhu, lord and master of all you survey, but you must always be wary, because solitude is the father of passion. Once the Emperor Akbar asked his favorite courtier Birbal, "What is the father of passion?" Emperors are like that. Suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, they ask the most unusual questions. Birbal had no ready answer, and so Akbar told him, "If you don't find out for me what is the father of passion, within 3 months your head will be disconnected from your shoulders." Birbal bowed low. What else could he do? His boss had given him an order. After 2.5 months, Birbal had come nowhere near discovering the father of passion. He began to worry for his life. His daughter noticed his despondence and asked him his reason for it. When he told her, she just giggled and said, "Call the emperor for dinner." Meanwhile, she selected one of her serving maids who bore a certain resemblance to her and made the girl into her double. When the emperor came for dinner, Birbal had been sent out so that there were only two present, Akbar and his courtier's daughter. The delicious rich food was washed down with 2 bottles of heavy wine, and soon the food, the low lights, and the wine went to the emperor's head, and he indicated to the young lady that he would be pleased to have her company to bed for the night. Birbal's daughter had, of course, anticipated this. It was part of her plan. She consented graciously and asked for a moment to ready herself. Leading Akbar to the bedchamber, she sent in her double. The serving girl, she enjoyed sex with the emperor all night long and then returned to her own room after he slept. When the emperor awoke, he was suddenly seized with remorse. "I have deflowered the daughter of my best friend. How will I ever face him again? How can I demonstrate my penitence for this lapse in my morality?" And he sent for Birbal's daughter. She entered, laughing, which amazed Akbar, who was sure she would be sobbing and beating her breast. She said, "Refuge of the world, it was not I that you deflowered, it was my double," and produced the serving maid for proof. Giggling, she continued, "I want to prove to you that solitude is the father of passion, so that my father's head would be spared. Are you satisfied?" Akbar was more than satisfied. In court that day, he publicly congratulated Birbal for his brilliance and for having such a brilliant daughter, and he made a gift of a large tract of land to the girl who had lost her virginity. Of course, she was thrilled that the emperor had made love to her, so the land was just an added bonus. This is why it is so hard to be off in some cave somewhere and maintain your balance of mind. Temptations will come to you by the dozen. Celestial damsels, buxom country lasses, tribal ventures. You have to be thoroughly prepared so that you are ready for anything. But even if you are prepared, you can still make grave errors which might have lasting consequences, I know. One day in Girnar, while walking about in the jungles, I saw a young lady near a tree. She was really beautiful, and it looked as if she was from a good family from her looks and the way she was dressed. but I couldn't understand what she would be doing out in the middle of a deep jungle. As I passed her, she said, Meow, shall I come? Now I didn't know what to think. What is she doing acting like a prostitute out here in the dense forest, soliciting me? I decided that the best thing to do would be to walk on. She started to follow, and she kept repeating, Meow, meow. I told her, Cats say meow, meow. Are you a cat? But she said nothing at all except meow, meow. I continued to walk and she continued to follow until I began to feel tired. I sat down and she came near me, repeating meow, meow. I was tired and fed up with her, and that made me lose my temper and said, If you are coming, come. And immediately I was entrapped. She was a Yakshini. You don't know what trouble I had with her. I wouldn't dare meet anyone, even other sadhus, because she would have finished them off. She was so possessive. Anyway, when I was at the tether end of my rope, my Mahapurush freed me from her. This is only a minor one of the many reasons I have for saying that I owe everything to my big daddy, my Mahapurush. If I am flayed alive for millions of births, it would still be insufficient to repay him. Maya
This is
spares no
the
one,
this is the
and she
benefit
never spared me either.
this is the benefit of having a guru, because the guru watches over you. So if you make a mistake, the guru can protect you.
Maya spares no one, and she never spared me either. Once in Girnar, when I had to urinate, I laid my fire tongs down on a rock, and when I came back, it had turned into gold. I couldn't believe my eyes. I picked it up and marked the stone so that I could remember exactly where it was. My idea was to use it whenever I needed gold. I went down to Junagadh town and sold the fire tongs to a goldsmith after breaking it into pieces. A gold fire tong is of no use to a sadhu. Then I bought a new iron fire tongs and distributed the money I realized from the sale of the gold. When I got back to the place where the stone had been, there was no mark, no sign I had ever been there, nothing. I tried several of the stones, but to no avail. I had to I had tried to capitalize on it and had lost it as a punishment for forgetting to rely on nature to provide for me. How many people really rely on nature? Once, when I was in Girnar, I decided to make a test. I went without food and water to see when God would come and feed me. The first 2 days were awful. My head was splitting. On the third day, I decided if God does not come before sunset, I am going to eat anyway, and I will believe from then on that God is a real phony. As the day wore on, I was becoming more and more desperate for sunset. The hunger was so great and my head so painful. Suddenly, about 15 minutes before sunset, a young girl whom I had never seen before came up to me and said, Why are you making yourself starve like this? I have brought milk for you. At first, I wanted to grab the milk and drink it all at once. I was so hungry. But I had my position to consider. I had to continue with my arrogance, so I said, go on, get out of here. But I wondered how she knew I was hungry. When I asked her, she said, I can see it on your face. Then I felt ashamed. My facade was not as perfect as I had hoped. She insisted I take the milk. Still, I pretended to refuse it. And then she grabbed my matted locks and poured the milk down my throat. It was like nectar after not eating or drinking for 3 days. And then, without my mentioning anything about my vow, she said, Now, has God fed you or not? And then she disappeared. And from that day onward, I know that God looks after everyone. I have been blessed by my mentor so that wherever I go, I will always get my food and even cigarettes. Even if I go to the jungle, the monkeys bring me fruits. Am I not fortunate? My mentors were very good, really good, excellent. Thanks to them, I was able to perform sadhana in the cave of the 64 yoginis, which was the high point of my stay in Girnar. You might try to visit this cave without an invitation. As you approach it, suddenly a giant cobra will rear towards you, standing bolt upright on his tail. If you know the proper mantra, you can immobilize him, no doubt. But then, as you move on, you will start to hear the sound of wild spirits. Suppose you are successful at immobilizing all the spirits, which is highly unlikely, then as you proceed, suddenly you will fall for no apparent reason and break your leg. Out on a mountain with a broken leg near a cave with a well deserved reputation for preventing the curious from visiting it, who will come to rescue you? So there is no use in trying to enter this cave unless you have a good friend to pull strings on your behalf. I was lucky. My Mahapurush wanted me to perform this sadhana. Even so, I had to be purified first. I was given a small leaf and I began to vomit and purge to remove all the worldly elements from my body. For the next 2 days, I was not allowed to drink even water. And by the third day, I was really almost unable to go on. Then I was invited into the cave, and a panel of beings, I can't explain what sort of beings, welcomed me as one of their own. I am forbidden to discuss the nature of my sadhana there, but I can tell you this: the yoginis are the companions of the great goddesses. This is a twofold advantage. They can introduce you to the great goddesses, and they can teach you what they have been taught. Actually, Shakti is the same in any form, only the details of the manifestation differ. In the case of the great goddess, the entire range of possibilities. Great In the case of the great goddess, the entire range of possibilities of Shakti are divided into 9 or 10 aspects. For the 64 yoginis, there are 64 aspects, which, when taken as a unified whole, represent the totality of Shakti in the universe. To succeed at the sadhana of one or two is feasible. To succeed at all 64 is nigh unto impossible. But the benefits, if you do succeed, are unimaginable. Eventually, I was ordered to leave Girnar and return to the world. I never wanted to come back to civilization, but orders are orders. When I finally got back to Bombay, after being in Girnar and then wandering about as a sadhu, I used to sit in a room where everything was black: walls, ceiling, furniture, floor, everything. I used to wear a black lungi and would smoke ganja all day long and drink imported whiskey straight from the bottle. I was in my own mood all day long and never slept. To rest, I would lie down for a half hour or so. The more intoxicants I would take, the more alert and silent would I become. Visitors would bring mad persons to me, stark, raving, violently insane, and I would put them in my garden. And when I felt like it, I would go out and give them one slap. Immediately, they would become all right. I used to experiment with new ways of curing diseases also. Sometimes I would dispense the ashes from the pipes I had been smoking and they would do the job. Sometimes I would blow a whistle and the disease would go away instantaneously. I enjoyed having fun like that. Everyone wondered how I did it, and no one could have ever understand. When too many people would start to come to me and I would become tired of all the rush, I would say, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake. I've slipped up in my sadhana, so now all my power is finished. And this would drive most of the people away. I have done that many times because I love more than anything else to be alone. Devotion. If I live for anything, I live for my sadhana. And I cannot emphasize too strongly that to succeed at sadhana, you must do whatever you set out to do with heart and soul. Never be like a prostitute, going from guru to guru, deity to deity, never selecting one as a true lover. Be like the chatak bird that drinks water only when the Swati asterism is in the sky. Never be happy anywhere but where your beloved is, whatever you may choose to love. Then you can get Siddhi, not otherwise. Just give me a minute. Even when I was engaged to my wife, I would invariably get up at 10 p.m. no matter what I was doing and would go to the smashan. She would ask me, "What do you do when you leave here?" One day I decided to take her along with me. Why keep secrets from anyone? I drove to the smashan and parked the car. "Listen, while I am doing my sadhana, I will not be able to come and help you out. You will have to wait until dawn. Think it over." She said, "I'll wait in the car until you finish." I shrugged my shoulders over her stupidity, walked over to the blazing pyre, sat down, and began my rituals. At dawn, I returned to the car to find she had fainted. Foam was coming from her mouth, and her skin was cold. A nice slap brought her to her senses, and she started mumbling deliriously. "No, no, don't come near me. Take me home." I took her home, and she was in bed for a month with high fever from the fright of it. What did she see there? No one knows. And still, she married me. This is Rinanubandhan.
So
My wife,
many times when you do these sadhanas, you can fall badly sick. That's why again a guru is very important in these sadhanas.
my wife says I'm a fool. Hundreds come to me to be treated and get their work done, and she says I'm a fool. I don't cash in on my abilities. It doesn't matter. Although we can't get along together, still I refer to her and respect her as my first guru. Because if it hadn't been for her nagging, I would never have rushed up things like I did. A blitzkrieg, if you like. You wanted me to become completely materialistic because she married me for my money. But it was not possible. If it had happened, we would not be talking together here today. Therefore, I thank her for making me realize the futility of life. You see, I have an Agori's frame of mind, challenge and response. Either I die or I succeed. Either I kill you or you kill me. I picked this up in the jungle as a sadhu and also when I was a wrestler. That competitiveness has always been there. Once, when I had gone to see my junior Guru Maharaj, after a long interval, I went to the cave I kept nearby and found some other Agori sitting in it. I got wild. The beauty of that cave is that no one ever sits there when I am gone, but inside it is always spotless as if it were being regularly cleaned. It is full of whitened skulls and snakes dripping off the ceiling. Many of my friends have seen it, and they have all become frightened. There is a tree outside which gives a different type of fruit in each month of the year. You can obtain one fruit from it each day, and with the cool water from the spring within the cave, you can live splendidly. I told the other Agori, whose name was Bhutnath, "Look, this is my cave. If you want to remain alive, you had better pack up and leave immediately." He started to bluster. "This may have been your cave, but now it belongs to me. If you don't like it, I don't care. Get out." What arrogance! This was serious. I told him, "I am warning you for the last time. I have nothing against you, but I can't be responsible for what my friends will do to you if you stay here any longer." He just continued to blather. "Do you want to see what I can do? If you don't leave now, I will kill you." Unfortunately, the moment he spoke these words, he vomited blood and died. I buried his body. Who will waste money for wood to cremate him? About some things, it is necessary to be very strict. But you can't punish just anyone who makes fun of you. Only those who should know better, like Bhutnath. Besides, to punish someone is also to create a new karma, even if that someone deserved it, like Bhutnath did. Lo- Every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's law of motion. Eventually, you will have to pay for each and every karma you create, unless you find someone who is willing to take some of your karmas away from you and endure them himself, which is quite unlikely. A sadhu has his own karmas to worry about, and rarely will he take anyone else's karmas to reduce that person's sufferings. I have tried it and I have suffered for overstepping my limits. I took the karmas of one fellow suffering from throat cancer just to spare his children from being fatherless. For 40 days, I couldn't even drink water. I survived on sips of lime juice mixed in a glass of soda. Now I know what cancer is like. You see, if the patient will have to suffer for 6 years, you can suffer yourself for 6 months or 6 days, depending on the strength of your penance, because the austerities make the reaction easier to bear. But suffer you must. Usually, however, a sadhu will say, "You have performed the action and enjoyed the fruit at the time. Now you are enjoying the reaction. Please learn a good lesson from it and don't make any mistakes again." You may find fakirs to help you because they are more emotional, but only a few sadhus are exceptions to this rule. I know the truth of this story personally. There was once a girl who married and was happily living in Bombay when she developed leprosy. Her husband and his family threw her out of the house, and her own family refused to take her in. In despair, she went to Girnar. In the jungle, she found a sadhu sitting on his dhuni. When he saw her, he grunted at her several times, but she still refused to move. Finally, he had to say, "Ma, please do leave here. The sun is about to go down, and it is very dangerous to be out in the jungle at night." She replied, "I have come to Girnar to find some Baba who will cure me. Until now, all the sadhus and fakirs I have met could do nothing. And if you also can't do anything, I have decided to kill myself because I cannot stand it any longer." The Baba didn't say anything after that, and he continued to sit by his dhuni, she sitting nearby. Night fell, and the cold set in, and she started to shiver, but she didn't move. At about 3 a.m., the Baba got up to have his bath. When he came back, he smeared himself with ash from his dhuni, sat on the ground, and called the girl over to him and motioned her to sit on his lap. Then he embraced her and she became free of the disease instantaneously. I can take you to her today. She is a grandmother now. Her husband and everyone else had to admit that she was cured. And the Baba, well, he had to suffer terribly for 40 days agony. That sort of compassion, and you find in only one out of thousands of sadhus and fakirs. A householder, a Ghori, cannot afford to be so cruel. He has his own obligations, his people to protect and provide for, and he must be compassionate. To wear ochre robes is really a terrible responsibility, and that is why I don't wear them. While I don't, I am a normal human being and I can play around as I like. I can enjoy my life and make mistakes, but when I put that on, I can't afford to make even a single mistake. This is another reason why I continuously test the people who come to me to learn something of spirituality. Some of them think they are ready to go out into the jungle without any preparation whatsoever. But do they realize what it means to divorce yourself from all your comforts and live like a sadhu? Once I met a sadhu in North Indian forest. He was an Englishman, actually, but he had spent 20 years in India already. When I met him, Some of our bigoted Brahmins claim smugly that Westerners will never be able to succeed at our sadhanas perfectly. But that is all bull. Actually, Westerners have some qualities which are rare in Indians nowadays. For example, they are thorough in whatever it is they do. This sadhu, named Mast Ram, literally intoxicated with Ram, was as perfect a sadhu as you will ever find. When I met him, he had injured his leg and the wound was full of pus and termites. Yes, termites. I felt sorry for him. I was sure he must be suffering some disturbance in his meditation on that account. So I volunteered to cure him. Oh, no, no, don't bother, he told me in elegant English. Why disturb them? Let them eat, let them eat. Can you imagine? Would you be able to say the same thing if it were your leg which was being devoured by insects? I doubt it. Not in the beginning, at least. Which is why I tell the people who come to me, if you cannot concentrate properly in Bombay, where you have all the facilities, food whenever you want it, a comfortable bed, and so on, how could you possibly concentrate out in the jungle with mosquitoes swooping down at you at odd hours, with a rock for a bed and whatever you can beg for your dinner? I never wanted to leave Girnar, but I can see now it was the right thing to do. I've learned so much about the world and the people who live in it. I can understand how they can be miserable, and I try to help them out of their misery, physical or mental, so that they can maybe remember God occasionally. I love to play about with my children to teach them new things and to help them overcome their bad habits. One day, one of them may even develop sufficiently to be fit to become a disciple. One of my American children told me once, very sweetly and sincerely, I am really proud to be able to say I know you, and I am so glad that I can love you and that you reciprocate my love, that it is mutual. I just hope my love is not a burden to you. Wasn't that a nice thing to say, but very naive? I told him, your love is no burden to me because it is very inconstant love. You love me some of the time, your wife some of the time, your other friends part of the time, and some of the time you are overcome by self doubt and are not sure who you love or even if you do love. If your love ever becomes a real love, then it will definitely be a burden to me because then I will have to work hard to live up to it. The purpose of sadhana is to develop real love. But nowadays it is so difficult to do proper sadhana because of all the obstacles. The secret is to be sincere about whatever it is you take as your sadhana, no matter how insignificant or unimportant it may seem to you. God is not interested in big sadhus or saints. God is interested only in sincerity. That is why Krishna cannot do without Radha. She can remember nothing else except Krishna, and her remembrance drags him to her. When Kinarama Ghori cured that dancer of leprosy, or when the Baba in Girnar cured that Bombay girl of leprosy, the love that Kinaram and the Baba showed was infinitely greater than any love you have ever experienced in your life. Why? Because, first of all, it was done knowing full well that the opposite party would never be able to repay such a gift. Normally, lovers work on the principle that a fair exchange is no robbery. A lover loves his or her partner only because he or she is confident that the partner will return that love. How many people love without any expectation of return? Secondly, it was a love which was so great that Kinaramji and the Baba were willing to suffer for the opposite party. It is one thing to love without any expectation of return. It is a very different thing to love with the intention of suffering in the other's stead. Sometimes you will find mothers who can do it, especially animal mothers protecting their young. This is why I am always desirous of sitting in the lap of the mother so that I can always be learning how to love. This is real love, and this love is a real burden. Where did this love come from? Did Kinaramji want to enjoy sex with the dancer? Did the Baba look at the young lady's body before agreeing to cure her? No. Ordinary love for the flesh can never go so deep because of the instinct of self preservation. This was love directed inward to the Atma, the fragment of the universal soul which dwells in everyone. Overwhelming love for God made these things happen. That Baba and Kinaramji likewise thought, Wah, Lord, are you suffering? Let me relieve you. Real love changes things. Generally, people say the aim of life is moksha or salvation, by which they mean freedom from being obliged to take birth again on earth. But I believe in a personal God and I say to him, Lord, let me be born over and over again thousands of times, but don't take your face away from me. Make me a blind leper for centuries, but never desert me, always keeping me in your heart and in your eyes. My beloved loves to play about with me, and I love to play about with him. And the result is emotional highlights. Mahabhav Samadhi. Can you prevent two lovers from meeting? No. Even if they have to meet in the road or in some public area where everyone can see what they are up to. Do they have any sense of time or place? No. Kamatu ranam na bhayam na lajja. Fear and shame do not exist for those afflicted with the disease of desire. And bhakti is far more intense than physical love. Two souls merge into one another. Can anyone describe it? To achieve it, you must forget the external completely and go deeper and deeper within. So go on with your sadhana longer and longer until you can't live without your deity and he or she can't live without you. Then go further, go so deep that you forget even the deity. The deity then will feel so miserable without your love and remembrance that he or she will run after you and demand worship. This becomes such a bondage of love that you can't escape it. You become lost, absolutely lost, useless to the world, lost within yourself, playing with your beloved. And when that happens, your perspective on life will undergo a radical change. You'll see things completely differently because you are no longer part of the usual current of worldly events. So your priorities will be determined by your bhakti. Here is an example. Should we stop here?